of the Planning, Housing and Economic Development Committee. We're taking up continuing transportation issues in the subdivision staging policy. We're joined by committee members, myself, Andrew Friedson Jawando, and Councilmember Hucker, Chair of the Transportation Committee. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, thank you. This is a follow-up from 2 weeks ago when the Fed last met on transportation issues. And these are the items that haven't been covered yet. Or maybe it's an update on a couple of things. The first issue, it's really not even an issue, it's just an update. 2 weeks ago, when the Fed and GEO committees met jointly, you agreed that the medical center policy area and the Tacoma policy area, two new metro station policy areas, would be created, and that there would be policy areas around Purple Line stations, either all of those basically conforming to about a half-mile walk shed. And we said at the time was the half-mile walk sheds that we showed you were rough, in that they went maybe to a mid-block or something. And for boundaries for the planning board and for DPS to administer the SSP and the impact tax respectively, they need to have definable boundaries so they can know what's inside the boundary and what isn't. So working with the planning staff, and the maps that you see on circles 1 through 8 are the, I'm sorry, 1 through 6 are the new maps. And Pam, if you could put them up, we'll go through this relatively quickly. If you can show circle 1 first. Okay, this is the medical center policy area boundary we're talking about now. This is actually, it's a half-mile for the most part. It goes a little beyond that to include all of NIH and all of the Walter Reed Medical Center. Not that it makes any difference at all to those because they're federal, they're not charged, but it didn't seem to make sense to actually draw an arbitrary line through the middle of those. Otherwise, the only areas that are included that might have an effect in terms of the impact tax are that little corner of East Bethesda in the southeast corner of this map. Again, there's very little, I don't think there's any development happening there, but there might be a vacant lot in there. Somebody might build a house, and this way they would get a much reduced impact tax. It also includes Stone Ridge Academy in the sort of the northeast corner. So if they ever built an addition onto their building, their campus, they would have lower impact tax because they were within half a mile. Go to the next map if you would, Pam. This is the Tacoma policy area. This is what's within a half-mile walk of the Tacoma metro station. Obviously, it's just that portion of it that's in Maryland. Again, the same thing. The effect would be only if, say, businesses along Carroll Avenue, which are near the bottom of this map, or some individual homes might get built on vacant lots, they would have a lower impact tax. It really wouldn't affect the level of service standard for Carroll Avenue. Well, it does affect the level of service standard for Carroll Avenue, but Carroll Avenue's level of service is very, very good. It didn't matter whether it was 80 seconds or 120 seconds per vehicle. I should have said on the medical center one, don't go back though. Really, as I pointed out 2 weeks ago, the main effect is that the intersections along Rockville Pike at Jones Bridge leading all the way up to Cedar Lane would have a 120-second standard rather than 80-second standard. If the council sticks with the current 120-second standard for policy areas, if you go with what the committee actually is, the Fed committee has voted 2-1 to agree to basically not have a standard, and there would not be a standard for those intersections along Rockville Pike. Okay, Pam, if you can go to the next one. Okay, this is Chevy Chase Lake. This one actually shrunk because there's a whole lot of area to the southeast and east which are not within half a mile. However, all that area is settled single-family residential area, and there's no development happening there. Otherwise, it's the same area that is covered by the current policy area, plus it includes a little bit of Spring Valley and North Chevy Chase, that little bump above Jones Bridge Road you see at the top. Go to the next one. The planning board recommended a sort of a Littonsville and Woodside policy area, a single one. They don't really quite meet when you look at the half-mile radii, and so the Littonsville one is the one that's outlined there in white in the middle, that covers most of the area. It goes up to the railroad tracks, the Metropolitan Branch in the side of it, and then the west side of it is the same boundary. It's Rock Creek, basically, and then same southern boundary, and the western boundary is some other streets that are about a half mile away from the Purple Line station. Go to the next map. This is the Woodside policy area, which, again, a half mile from the Woodside station. And it would be, it abuts the Silver Springs CBD policy area, so obviously that's not going to change. So it doesn't extend as far southeast as it otherwise would. And if you go to the last one, last map, this is actually the biggest change. When we look at the half-mile walking distance from all the Purple Line stations, it ended up being even a bigger area than what the planning board had recommended for the Dale Drive, Manchester, Long Branch, Piney Branch, and Tacoma Langley policy areas. It's all the area within that white line. We also included, there's land in sort of East Silver Spring, which is within a half mile of the Silver Spring Library Station. So again, following the rule that it's a half mile from a Purple Line station, it would be all of that. So that would be a new policy area, and it would absorb a couple of other policy areas that the planning board had proposed. It also means, I don't think it really makes a difference, but the Silver Spring Tacoma policy area would be kind of split between that area south of this Purple Line East policy area and the area north of it, but nevertheless, that would be the case. So that's what we came up with in terms of the boundaries, based on looking very carefully at the streets and the streams and the other definable boundaries that roughly conform with a half mile.
All right.
The next issue is the non-auto driver mode share. You also talked about this 2 weeks ago. If you go to the next slide, Pam. Next page. There you go. There's two charts like this in the packet. You saw this 2 weeks ago. This is the list of the policy areas that have non-auto driver mode share goals in the master plan. Chair Anderson raised a really good point at the last session that, some of these really seem out of date. One he pointed out, I believe, was Friendship Heights, where it says 39% is the non-auto driver mode share. Well, that doesn't sync really much at all with the Bethesda one that was adopted a couple years ago, which is 55%. Furthermore, a lot of these only have goals for either residential or employment. And the purpose of needing NADMS for the TDM exercise we're going through is to make sure there are goals for both residential and employment, either separate goals or as a blended goal. The unfortunate thing, though, is that, and this has been the case since the beginning of the growth policy or the subdivision staging policy, that whenever there's a conflict between what is in the master plan and what's in the growth policy / SSP, the master plan guides, because the master plan, the SSP and kind of growth policy is a staging of the master plan. So the SSP can't change these today or this over the next month or so. However, we're looking for a time, an opportunity in a countywide functional plan where it makes sense to add this to the scope of that, to basically revisit these policy areas. In the packet, I mentioned Thrive, but there may be others that could do that. And let me just go to the next slide quickly, but I think Mr. Friedson wanted to say something about this at one point. The next slide are the ones, these are the areas that are in red, orange, and yellow areas, which currently do not have a non-auto driver mode share goal in master plans. And this is what the planning board and staff have come up with. And basically the discussion 2 weeks ago was we were to go back and look at these again, just to make sure we were, there were some tweaks to do to this. And actually, in the middle of page 2, you'll see 6 tweaks. I could go through this really quickly. First of all, we just finished talking about the Purple Line East policy area. I'm sorry. The first one, we said that the Littonsville and Woodside policy area wouldn't be one, but it'd be 2 separate ones. So the chart needs to show Littonsville and Woodside separately. They still would have the same. We're still recommending the same NADMS, which is 50% blended, but it's really more of a technical thing. Secondly, because the Purple Line East policy area is a new policy area, we need a goal for that. The recommendation here is 50% blended, again, similar to Linsville and Woodside, and similar to Linsville and Woodside. That's what had been proposed for the Manchester Dale one. It would change the one for Tacoma Langley, which is now at 49, proposed as 49% residents, 36% employees, but 50% would be more consistent across that Purple Line area.
Okay. Pause you real quick, Glenn.
Sure.
Is there any objection to the boundaries? You kind of just kept going.
Yeah, well, that was, I believe that was really more technical, because we said what we do is we just take the guidance from the committees and said those, if you want to vote on those, you can, but
no, it's fine.
Just,
well, I think if we're recommending the map, I mean, the staff
okay,
has done
fine.
it, but I think the committee has to recommend them to the council, I would think, right, Mr. Kier?
I would think so.
All right, go ahead. Do you want to go back and?
Unless there are any concerns with planning, I don't personally have any objections.
Neither do I.
All right. That was an easy
Okay.
one.
Okay. Going on in this list of 6 changes to NADMS, the goal for Glenmont in the chart on Circle 8 shows 30% for employees, but there will be both housing and employment there. And again, all these areas should really have either a blended goal or separate ones for housing and employees. And so the recommendation here is to adopt a blended rate of 35%. Usually housing has a higher NADMS than employment. So if employment's thought to be correct at 30%, then between the two, between the employees and housing, 35% seem to be appropriate. The Clarksburg and Clarksburg Town Center policy areas in the chart show 29% for residential. Again, there's going to be both housing, and there are and will be more housing and jobs in both of those areas. So it should be a blended goal, or at least have goals separately for residential and non-residential. The problem here is that the goals for Germantown, east and west, are actually lower than 29% residential. So Clarksburg and Clarksburg Town Center, being further away from the region, would have somewhat less propensity to take transit than Germantown would, but only slightly less. So here, the recommendation here is to have the goal as being 25% for both the town center and for Clarksburg Town Center and the Clarksburg larger policy area.
All right.
Second to last one, Burtonsville. It has a 27% residential on this chart, but actually most of Burtonsville Town Center is commercial. Commercial typically, again, has a lower mode share than residential does. So we're recommending here that there be a 25% blended goal. And then finally, most of the second half of this chart are overwhelmingly residential areas, but there are some commercial in each of them. And again, there should be a blended goal. But since all of them are overwhelmingly residential, we felt like if we just change those percentages to blended goals, that would suffice. And so that's what we're recommending there.
Okay.
So those are the changes to that list. But again, we don't have a mechanism right now to change the goals in the first list. I know I talked to Mr. Friedman about this earlier. Did you want to talk about?
Yeah, we'll talk about NADMS. We talked a little bit about it last time. It's tied to the TDM ordinance as
Right.
last time. Generally speaking, I'm very, very enthusiastic about this broad strategy. I've been pushing this for many years. In fact, going back even, I think, before 2010, before I joined the council, I wanted to focus us on NADMS goals and policy areas and then try to achieve those goals. So I'm glad to see this coming to fruition. And I know from my colleagues that sometimes it takes 10 years to get, 2/3 of the way there. So conversation, Councilmember Friedman.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I share in the interest in the NADMS goals and updating them. Obviously, there are many master plans that are grossly out of date with where we currently are, what our current expectations are with what we expect for our you know, non-auto driver mode share goals. I don't believe that the general plan, that Thrive 2050, is the appropriate place for it. I think that these are goals that, as we see, that get out of date clearly, that need to be able to be adjusted appropriately. We need to be able to do it county-wide because master plan by master plan is a challenge. I would, in discussing with staff, I would recommend the pedestrian functional master plan, which is upcoming. I think it's not perfect, but it ties as closely as anything else currently in the work program. And, everybody's a pedestrian. I just want to point that out. Even a driver is a pedestrian because you have to get out of your car. We don't drive, drive through doesn't mean through the building. It means drive to the building. And, eventually you have to get out of your car and walk. And so I think that encompasses everybody, whether you're a transit user, a bicyclist, a car driver. And so I think pedestrian functional master plan would be the appropriate way to do it and get this done as quickly as possible. I think that the Thrive 2050 is supposed to be philosophical and broad strokes. I think this is too specific and too technical for that type of document. So I would just throw that out there for consideration.
It's good thought. I mean, can I just prefatory question here? Is it more complicated to do for these areas where you haven't done it than for the areas that you just did it? I mean, you just created these goals for 15 policy areas. Are these the ones that you can't do for it, like a lot more difficult, or is it just there's a procedural problem?
Again, the procedural problem with the ones where there's a goal in an existing master plan is that the SSP growth policy cannot supersede what's in a master plan.
The SSP implements the master plan, is the adequate public facilities for the master plan. So we need something that supersedes the individual master plans, and a countywide functional master plan, as we all know, would supersede the individual local master plans, and that would then become the overarching NADMS that can be, used from a policy standpoint.
Yeah, I think the pedestrian master plan is a really good idea. And it's also because that'll be before the council. I believe the last schedule we saw was sometime in 2022. And it would be nice to get this squared away really within the next year and a half, because we have the executive regs coming over from the executive probably not too soon. And then the next step after that will be establishing TDM goals, TDM boundaries, and you can't and TDMs, and you can't have a transportation demand management districts, and you really can't have that unless you know what the goals are. And so
the alternative would be to introduce a functional master plan amendment that actually, establish these, which would be a lot of bureaucratic process itself for something that's pretty simple, actually.
That's right.
Hans, can I weigh in on this?
Sure.
I think number one, we'd have to look at the pedestrian plan. I think we already noticed the scope for that, and that would have to be, I think, for legal purposes, would have to be in the scope in order for that to be legally permissible. But the other thought I had was, this is the first time we really considered this, but I think if you're not trying to adjust any of these downward, you could increase the NADMS goals through another policy document without amending those master plans. The master plan implication is just that, to the extent there's a staging requirement tied to hitting an NADMS number, then that would remain in place if you didn't amend the master plan. But you could require or try to get a higher number through TDM without changing the master plan.
I think that would be very difficult. I mean, I'd be very hard to enforce that because, again, everything in the TDM law says to lead to the master plan goal, and there's requirements. I can't remember all the details of them. Maybe Chris might remember more about measuring progress to the goal. So it needs to be a specific number that you're trying to hit.
It would be easier to change the TDM law than it would be to change every master plan. I think we can agree on that. Look, why don't we talk about this offline before we get to the full council, because I just think we need to look at this.
So, you please look at the notification issue, if you think that that is something that's insurmountable, let us know. Otherwise, I think Councilmember Friedson's idea is a very rational way to proceed. The only other question I would ask is, we just did it for a whole bunch of planning areas without any real issue. Is it so hard to actually just send us over a document and have a quick public hearing? Or would it be actually an extensive, difficult?
It's an extensive process, but I do think that we need to just talk amongst ourselves about the use of the pedestrian master plan, because that is a county-wide plan. And although we've done the scope, we have not actually noticed the public hearing for the pedestrian master plan. And that's where we would legally have to bring up this topic, is in the notice for the public hearing. So there is still an opportunity to do that. And I agree that a document like pedestrian master plan is much more a more appropriate vehicle than Thrive Montgomery.
All right, sounds like we're
Thank
going to
you.
give us. Okay, Chris, and then
If I
Meredith.
could,
I agree. Just chime in.
Thanks.
sorry. When we adopted the TDM ordinance, the notion was that we were gonna set the goals in some document that was updated on a regular basis. And I thought we had specifically referred that the goals would be set in the SSP. So I'm not a lawyer, but I'm wondering whether if that was actually what was encoded in the law, and therefore that would override the master plan goals all by itself. Or as Casey mentioned, it might be easier to amend that law than to develop an ad hoc process.
The law actually didn't say create new goals in the SSP. That was my suggestion, as done as a follow-up, and the council then gave that direction to the board, and they've done it. I guess the other way you could go is in, again, a county-wide plan, say something like all NADMS goals in master plans are moot or are discontinued. And then you could have an SSP resolution which has all of the areas in it. It's one or the other.
I think there are different ways to approach it. We could do a small separate amendment to the master plan of highways and transitways. There'd be another way to do it. But that would take,
That'd be a process. Yeah.
a process. You'd have to have public hearings at every level. I mean, even very quick master plan amendments, non-controversial, take 6 to 8 months just because of the actual noticing requirements for public hearings and so forth. So
and that's even true. And that's even true for a functional plan too, because I've been through those. You're right.
Yes. So I would just suggest that maybe we talk about this offline and see if there's some way we can attach this to our next countywide functional plan, which I think is the pedestrian plan.
Okay.
Let's go with the Friedson recommendation. Meredith.
Thank you for the county executive, Meredith Ellington. This is the right thing. I was going to raise this. I'm sure everybody was, to take this out of Thrive, but you could do it, as we discussed, just through minor master plan amendment. I mean, technically the hierarchy is that the local specific master plan takes precedence over a functional plan. Now here there's no conflict, but it seems to me the cleanest thing is just a simple master plan amendment of all the master plans to deal with the NADMS. But we support the broad principle.
All right, so we have a consensus I don't know if it's a fallback, but it's a way to proceed. And if there is a better option, we'll hear from everybody before full council.
Okay. The next set of issues, most of the rest of the meeting is about local area review. And the first issue, I'll turn it back over to the chairman, his proposal for exempting bioscience from the LATR tests.
Thank you. Appreciate your recommendation. I don't want to go too long into this, but I did append an article to the packet today that shows just what an incredible surge of investment is flowing into the region and into the county. I was talking with someone yesterday who actually handled a facility for a major company that did not come to Montgomery County, went to Frederick County, and he was explaining how the primary issue is speed to market. and how these companies are under incredible pressure to deliver some kind of solution to the market in a very timely manner, whether that's because in the immediate case they're trying to manufacture, a vaccine, or because they have a certain window of intellectual property that they have to get their product to the market before they lose their patent. In any event, we are generally considered to have somewhere between a year to a year and a half timeline for a project to move through the process. And there are other competitor jurisdictions that are smaller, much more nimble, that can very much sit down with with a company that wants to come in and say, we can get you through the process in 3 months. And that is something we've got to be able to do somehow. So what this proposal does is just remove one, part of what is a longer continuum of processes, and says, and I appreciated Glenn's observation that in the big picture here, the impact on transportation networks is, I don't know if the word negligible is an issue that you use, Glenn, but it's small. But the moment that we're in, anything we can do to accelerate the time that it takes for a project to get through is going to make it more competitive for the market, for the brokers that are out there who know very well how long it takes to get something done here, and advise their clients about that. So it necessitates the county to kind of step in there and say, if there is first of all, some companies will want to do their own transportation analysis just for their own understanding of situations and whether they want to do something, but it necessitates the county to step in and say, look, if there's something, we'll look at it, we'll think about it, and then, we'll take care of it. So that is the proposal before you, is just to remove this one process of a long continuum of processes. The only comment I would make, I appreciated Glenn's recommendation. I would just not recommend a sunset. Actually, I did recommend initially a 5-year sunset, but Glenn points out that the SSP is done every 4 years, and so he recommends sunsetting in 4 years. I would counter that to say, why don't we just assume that it will be reconsidered in the SSP, and we don't have to sunset it specifically, but the planning board will consider the SSP and they'll make a recommendation to us in 4 years. They may find at that time that it's no longer, an urgent issue or whatever. The council will reconsider it anyway in 4 years, is what I really mean to say. So I'd ask that we not specifically include a sunset. So anything I missed there, Glenn? And
I just want to say just like 3 things. First of all, we do need a definition for what a bioscience facility is, and what I'm showing is the definition that's used for the impact tax law, what the bioscience facility is. Of course, this doesn't affect impact taxes at all, since bioscience, the council years ago gave it a 0 rate, so there's no charge there. Secondly, on the going to 4 years instead of 5, I guess the way I say it is that if you put in a sunset of 4 years, that'll guarantee that the planning board will look at it. There's no guarantee the planning board will look at it necessarily in 4 years, and it basically forces the situation to look at it. And again, the result may be from the council at that time either just continue it for a number of more years, or for continuing it but with some tweaks based on the analysis that's been done of how well it's done, or to let it expire. So I would still recommend having the 4 year sunset. And thirdly, in terms of the effective date, the planning board's recommended effective date for the entire SSP is January 1st. And so I'm just filling those numbers with whatever the number of years is. If it's 4 years, it'd be 4 years. If it's 5 years, 5 years. If there's no sunset, it would not have a, it would just say that it would be approved after January 1st, 2021, and not have a closing date.
Okay, before I go to Councilmember Jawando, I know in the package you said that the county executive did not support this.
Correct.
Meredith, can you expand on that?
No, I didn't. He didn't. He doesn't support this particular uh, exactly the way it has been written here. He is looking into other options, other changes that might, in the long run, be more efficient.
All right. Councilmember Join.
Okay, thank you. I think it's appreciate the thoughtfulness of the proposal, and I think it's something worth trying, considering the industry. But I do think it would be appropriate to have the 4-year sunset so that there is a forced conversation and that we've got a lot to do, and I think that will force it. And I agree with the Mr. Orland's recommendation on that. But I'm fine with the policy itself. But I think it would be better if we put the sunset in at 4 years.
Thanks. Andrew.
Yeah, it's a very thoughtful proposal. I think it's a critical industry that's never been more important, obviously, than it is right now. And I'd be comfortable going with the staff recommendation, just do the 4 years. I think it's a distinction without much of a difference, still gets us where we want. I don't think there's any harm in having it reassessed in the next go round. I think it will be continued, but I think, alongside the SSP at 4 years makes sense to me.
All right. We have a committee recommendation that matches the staff recommendation, which I guess is 2-1. I don't know how to describe that other than that, but I think we all are in agreement about the philosophical point. All right. Let's keep
Mr.
going.
Chair, if I could ask
go ahead, Chris.
If the committee could direct staff to ensure that the traffic study guidelines address use projects that have a significant biotech component, I think that would be useful, because there is some concern that you could have a major subdivision that the very large non-biotech component, but might be 51% biotech uses. So I would ask that you direct us to address that in the study guides.
Okay.
I think we could do that, but it's usually the case where it's the facility itself is all that's exempt. So if it's part of a larger development, the non-bioscience part would still be subject to the LATR tests.
Okay, that's reasonable. We would like that clarification so that we're all proceeding.
Sure.
Now let's clarify that, and I've reconsidered. I'm going to support my colleagues on this one, so we'll send it as a 3-0.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm keeping notes at the same time I'm staffing this. Okay, thank you. Okay, the next several issues are going to be complicated. I apologize to say, but it is what it is.
Yeah, you owe us an apology, Glenn.
Yeah, it's all my fault, right? I don't think so. In any event, it's a group. This is a group grope. The bicycle system adequacy test. A lot of discussion about that 2 weeks ago. I remember the committee, particularly Mr. Friedson, mentioned that we ought to be using the same kind of metric for all these LATR tests and not have different metrics for each one by mode. So you asked us, the staffs, DOT, planning staff, and council staff, to try to get together and produce consensus recommendations, which I kind of thought we had, but I guess it looks like we don't exactly. But we do all agree that we should be using peak hour person trips as the
streams are down currently. The recording is happening, and what the cable office typically does is continue with the recording, and then we post it after the fact. So it is being captured.
Yeah, this is Bob Drummer, but it's not a live feed. I think you probably need to stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that makes sense when the room is open and people can walk in and out of the room. But in this case, the room really isn't open because we're using Zoom.
It's back up. The YouTube feed is back up.
Oh, we're back.
Okay.
All right. All right. All
A
right.
little
Let's
stalling
do it.
always helps.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, do we need to go back and address any issues that were there during the time the feed was down? Do we know when that was?
I could just
Yeah, why don't
start
you
again.
reiterate what you said.
Okay, I
Start
think
about 11:20, something like that.
I think just
Okay.
start at the beginning of this section again.
okay. All right. So again, the 2 weeks ago, the committee asked us to try to come up with consensus recommendations. Hello,
Did you have to wash up there?
Michelle,
Michelle, you're still
can
on.
you-
Got to mute
What?
yourself, Michelle. Michelle. Okay.
It must be Friday. It must be Friday.
Freaky Friday.
The world of Zoom. Okay, so we tried to come up with a consensus on a bicycle master plan, a bicycle adequacy test, and the staffs had at least initially agreed up till now as to having a test which is sensitive to the size of the development, more sensitive than what the planning board had recommended, which is 2 categories. We have 4 categories. And also sensitive to where the bikeways would be built, whether it's in red and orange areas or yellow and green areas, yellow and green being areas where there's much less propensity to bike. And we came up with a chart that's on this circle on page, I believe it's on page 5, which shows the distance from the frontage that a development would have to provide what's called an LTS1 or LTS2 bikeway, which is typically a separated bike path, bike lanes, side paths, or trails. And if there's already some that are being built that are built in that area, then that does not be done, but the rest of it has to be filled out. We have the comment from Brian Downey from BF Saul, who believes that this requirement is much too large, and he sent a map showing a property in Bethesda, which shows a few blocks around his property where he'd have to build bikeways both on the north-south streets and the east-west streets. And we were discussing whether or not this part of the test, we'll talk about the mitigation payment in a minute. We're not there yet. But if it's feasible to actually build bikeways in an area like, in any area, the question is what should be required? And he was suggesting, Mr. Downey was suggesting, that it be the lesser of the frontage of the site, the length of the frontage of the site, or the number that's in this table, but not in every direction. It would just be the total. That'd be the total length of bikeway that would be required. I think Mr. Anderson and myself pointed out that the frontage idea really doesn't work because you could have a differing size buildings on having the same frontage, and that wouldn't be equitable. But the question really then is, should there be a limit on the length of the bikeway that's built under this? And I think then Mr. Conklin mentioned the possibility of figuring out what the cost would be and have that be the payment. But that's really, I think, the case only if there's going to be, if the developer can't build what's required in this table, what would be the mitigation? And that's the next discussion we have to have. That's a separate discussion than what would be required in the table. So I think that's where we left off.
I mean, just to be clear, like, to use the cited example, I don't think the developer can build this. Like, the developer cannot build on their own 10 blocks of, or however many blocks of bike lane, right? Because usually we're moving the curbs and stuff. Okay, let's talk about this here. Gwen, can you?
Yeah, and I'd be happy to have other folks from planning chime in. I think that, again, our problem that we're always facing is we're trying to put one rule in place for a county that has many, many different kinds of situations. It may be appropriate for a large development in the green area to build the bikeway along their frontage because it's pretty straightforward. They have to make a lot of improvements to their frontage anyway, just to create a new development out of a farm. But in downtown Bethesda, as I think Mr. Downey's illustration showed, there are bikeways all around that are needed all around his development project, and that he can't go and build those because it involves all the things that I think Councilmember Reamer was just talking about, having to work with other property owners, having to move curbs. And those are the projects that really are appropriate for the public sector to do. So I don't know if, Mr. Conklin, did raise the issue of a dollar amount, and maybe that is a direction that we should go. I think that, it could even be that, perhaps in our yellow and green policy areas where it's more straightforward typically to build the new facility, because you aren't dealing as much with other properties. We have a linear test, and in our orange and red areas, it's a dollar amount test. Because I do think we need different rules for different types of areas. And but we haven't had a whole lot of time to talk about this amongst ourselves. So I'm sort of speaking for my point of view. I don't know if, Jason or the team or Chris Conklin may have some other thoughts as well.
Can I just throw in one more point real quick? Just reading again our recommendation. It says he must construct side paths, separated bike lanes or trails consistent with the bicycle master plan. And I don't have that in front of me, but if Dave Ansbacher's in line, he probably has this all in his head. I can't imagine that all the streets in Mr. Downey's chart have side paths, separated bike lanes or trails along those streets. There may be a couple of them that do, but most of them probably don't. And so in that case, they wouldn't be required to be built. It'd have to be whatever is in the bicycle master plan to be done. I'm not saying we should go ahead and just adopt this way it is. I'm just saying that the effect that he's showing isn't going to be nearly as large as what he's showing because of having to be consistent with the bicycle master plan.
You're saying to use that example, you would look at the map that he has presented and say, well, where is the facilities that are called for in, I guess it would be the Bethesda plan, or maybe it's the Bikeways Master Plan. And to the extent that they touch into there, then they are required. But are they required to build them, or are they required to, I mean, there still is the issue of actually, can they build them when it's another property frontage that we're talking about?
Language below the table, Mr. Reamer, the language below the table is when we wouldn't want them to actually build them.
Right. Maybe we should go into that now, so we then have the fuller discussion, which is if the planning board, let's take Mr. Downey's development. Let's just say that a part of that map he's showing does still have some bikeways that have to be built. Not all those streets, but a couple of them. And if the planning board and DOT both agree, well, being redundant there, they both agree, that constructing all or part of that requirement may not be practicable due to undesirable transitions, unattainable right-of-way, or an existing CIP project is already programmed to do it, then an applicant may meet the requirement by a mitigation payment to MCDOT, equal to MCDOT's estimated cost of constructing facilities. Then there's the next sentence talks about where that money is to be spent, and there we have some disagreement about that. But I'll just talk about that. What came out of the initial discussion amongst the staffs is that the money has to be spent on a similar kind of bike way, side path, separated bike lane or trail consistent with the bicycle master plan in that same policy area, or in the case of a red policy area, which is small, it can be in the surrounding policy area too. Chris, why don't you point out your concerns with that.
You're right, and this is cross-cutting across a few of these different tests, but what this approach is essentially doing is setting up a three-dimensional matrix of restricted funds. It's restricted by geography, it's restricted by the mode, and in some cases it's restricted by whether or not it's capacity or other improvements. And we are deeply concerned that what's going to happen is we're going to get contributions that are not sufficient for us to make use of those contributions to implement projects. It's kind of like if you have 10 different gift cards to 10 different stores and all of them are not.
That is a deadly example because we all have 10 different gift cards.
That's what we're really worried about, and it's administratively very difficult to sequester all these funds by area, by mode, and by purpose. And we know we're going to struggle immensely with this approach. So we were asking for one dimension or two dimensions of the three dimensions to get removed so that we have funds that need to be used for specific modes, or funds, if they're dedicated to certain areas, are able to be used to implement the highest need and highest priorities within that area, not necessarily restricted to bike or traffic capacity or transit. But looking at all those ways is very difficult for us.
Thank you, Glenn. I don't want to move on to the next issue before we resolve the previous one. So I just want to make sure we're in agreement or not yet about the previous one. It sounds like we think maybe while Mr. Downey has, presented us with a concern, it sounds like when you look a little bit further, there may not be as much of a concern there, but I want to make sure that that's true. So let's just discuss here, any additional comments about whether this is
the scope
going too far. What's that?
The scope issue.
I said this while we were struggling with the video, but I think the word in this paragraph, it says mitigation payment to MCDOT equal to. I think the equal to is probably too rigid, and I would suggest that it should be that does not exceed.
Okay. That makes sense to me.
I agree with the thought process there. I just can we clarify where we are if we change the language to what Mr. Conklin has suggested and how that relates to
sort of tie it all back together?
Yeah, exactly. The planning board recommended. I just think for the public, there's been a lot of moving parts. We went in, we went out. I think it would be helpful just to summarize, to make that clarification of how that relates to what the planning board recommendation was to what we would be looking at currently.
Again, there's two parts to it. One is what is the scope of what a developer would be required to do, and the other is if the planning board and MCDOT agree that whatever part of that scope is not feasible, what is the payment and how would it be used? And how could it be used?
Just quick interjection. This is all creditable against the impact tax or not?
Yes, it is. Yes, if you're building a new bike path, yes, it is. In most cases, they will be able to use the full credit.
If I could, for the record, Jason Sartori with the Planning Department, I'm curious because in some cases, what might help bring an area up to LTS2 conditions might be a traffic signal, and so the question is, it might be appropriate to restrict this in some sort of linear way, right? But how does a potential traffic signal that might be implemented come into play, or does that payment does that work off of the impact tax payment as well? Is that creditable to that?
Well, we are not yet going with Downey's recommendation that it should be restricted to a linear definition, right? It's more about the test and what the plan requires to satisfy the test. Am I right about that?
Right. Can I add couple more points real quick? The problem with using this money anywhere is this is a local area review. I mean, this is basically the alternative payment. The mitigation payment is to avoid a requirement to meet what is needed in nearby the development. And to be able to then say, oh, we can use the money anywhere. The county, this is a fee. And there has to be a nexus between why the developer is paying the fee and what it's used for. and how much. And that's, we lose that entirely if we could just use it on anywhere, and in fact, on any other thing other than bikeways.
So
This
Chris,
is a bicycle
what do you think
test.
about that?
You
Gary?
can't do that.
You guys would have to defend that in court if someone wanted to challenge.
So Glenn, one of the things I think we have to remember that in Bethesda, this is an interim condition. We're spending time with Mr. Downing's position, but when the comes, that there is no payment, it's the payment, and then the improvement is part of the improvement that we've identified as part of the list of projects for use of those funds. And so this is a condition that in the red areas where we are going to earlier than later do the that it would be moot.
It's true, but the question is, when will they all be done? I mean, Bethesda's the next one, but then there are like 7 or 8 other metro station policy areas that haven't started yet. And there's all the other areas as well. This is a county-wide test. So I don't think we can, but Gary's right. If and ever an is, and we hope when, not if, but when umps are approved, then all of these tests are moot, all of them, because they replace all LOTR. But until then, we got to have something. So I think it's important to maintain the local part of this. Otherwise, the whole legal rationale for the fee disappears.
My answer to your question on that is I would like these characterized as transportation mitigation payments, not specific payments for specific elements of the transportation system. And then that's essentially what the is, because the is taking the needs across all the modes and then aggregating and then dividing them by development size. And that would be better than the 3-dimensional restriction, because then it's just used for transportation needs in this policy area rather than the very specific things that make up the transportation need.
But
I don't know whether that's legally defensible or not. But
I don't think it is. Until you have the when you have the I totally agree. But until you have the you have a bicycle test. And do you meet that bicycle test or not? If you meet it, fine. If you don't, you can make a payment to meet that bicycle test. You can't turn around and just use that money for a road or a pedestrian facility or something else. Then it becomes a tax. And there's no nexus there. This is unlike the impact tax, where you can really use it for anything that adds capacity anywhere in the county. This is a very concentrated thing. And we're already extending this to an extent by saying that if you're in a red policy area, you can use it in the surrounding orange policy area. That makes some sense because there is some overlap, some slop over. I'm actually suggesting that we apply the same rule for the Burtonsville, Clarksburg Town Center, Germantown Town Center policy areas, because although they're orange, they're also very small, and it's very unlikely to find a project there. But I have a hard time believing there aren't projects that can be identified and built within maybe not immediately, but within a year or two in any policy area. There's just so many bikeways to be built that I think that's really not an issue. It is more of a bureaucratic.
That's the key, right? I mean, a project comes in, they have to pay, I don't know, we're talking a couple $100,000, maybe, I don't know what we're talking about, for bikeway mitigation. And so within a couple of years, DOT has to spend that money on a project in that area. That's what you're saying. And
if you build the project, that is creditable against the impact tax. If you pay a fee, however, you're not. That is not creditable against the impact tax. So even though you're paying a fee to let DOT do other things, you are not providing that adequate public facility by building it yourself. So that's not creditable. So that's another reason why developers will probably try to want to build these things so they can get a dollar for dollar credit. It's only in a last resort situation where they make the payment.
That's a little concerning. I mean, it sounds like,
It's always been that way. The school facility payments was that way. The transportation mitigation payments were that way. They're never creditable against the impact tax. That's a fundamental principle going back for 20, 30 years.
Andrew?
Yeah, so it seems like we have two decision points. One is to make sure that the test is appropriate and adequate, that it is, fair and reasonable. That's one, and what that means in terms of the number of tests, the amount of, the cap of, not to exceed, and where that should land. And then the other question is what Dr. Orland just mentioned, is whether or not it should, be for the local area exclusively. I believe we need to find the right place to land on the fair and reasonable and adequate and appropriate on the first piece. I'm not sure exactly what that is, and I'm not sure that we have, fully fleshed that out yet. But on the second piece, I am just, for colleagues, I agree with Dr. Orland that, it should be local. The whole purpose of this is to support the infrastructure for, these facilities for the project itself. I mean, it is not a countywide tax. It is a mitigation fee, and I find it to be inappropriate to spend the money, in a completely unrelated place for, potentially unrelated purposes. It doesn't seem to me to be consistent with what the, purpose of this is. So I agree with Dr. Orland on that second piece.
Okay, let's go back to the first piece. I guess just a sort of basic question I have. It's not creditable against the impact tax because it's never been done that way.
No, it's not building anything. You don't get credit for just paying money towards to something. You get credit for into a pot. You get credit for actually building or paying DOT to directly build a project, whether it's an intersection improvement or a bike share station or any of the things that are listed in the impact tax law, but not for just.
Fine. What I'm getting at is, what is the cost of building a couple blocks of protected bike infrastructure in downtown Bethesda? It seems to me like it could be quite high versus, a more suburban setting. And, are we understanding what we're doing here? Are we potentially putting on costs that we think might actually be unreasonable? If it's the true cost of building, 4 blocks, 5 blocks of the protected bike lane network, is that reasonable? I really kind of put that back to DOT and the planning team. Like, is that something that is actually exorbitant, or is it something that is reasonable? But if this is not creditable, this is an expense that is in addition. It's the result of the bike tests.
Actually, can I ask just one more fact?
Yeah.
In the red policy areas, what's being required what would be required in this table for the trips that are 50 to 99 or 100 to 199. That's pretty much exactly what the test is now, because the test calls for, I believe it's 5 bike trips. In other words, if you look at the test that's been in effect since 2016, the amount of trips that are generated out of that trip this test is virtually the same. Even though you're using person trips now, it's given the percentage of these trips in red areas, it's virtually the same test. So it's not any different there. The difference is really for the much larger developments, particularly in the orange and the yellow and green areas. I believe that's right. Maybe Jason can correct me on that if I'm wrong. Jason? Did we lose you?
No, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I missed the point that you were actually asking me to confirm. I'm sorry.
The point I believe this is the case, that in this chart, this table, what would be required of a development in a red policy area for the 50 and 100 trip thresholds translates to the same requirement that's been in existence since 2016.
I'll have to take a look, because what we've had for this has been, it's been based on the number of non-motorized trips.
Right.
Right.
And so it was based on, and so since the mode share in Bethesda is about 50%, it ends up translating to be the same
about
thing.
the same. Yeah.
About the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's not a different requirement for that. The different requirement would be for the larger developments, the 200 or more peak hour trips, and it probably actually would be less of a requirement in the yellow and green policy areas, because we used the same test countywide before. Well, maybe not, because the mode share is different. I take that back. Yellow and green is probably more.
Okay.
So that's just context.
Sounds like
And
we're
there have been
established.
some bikeways. There have been some bikeways that have been built under this program. I didn't repeat it, but in the last packet, there's a chart. I think there are 6 or 7 projects since 2016 where bikeways and sidewalks also under that test were required. In Grosvenor area, I believe, was one. There were a few other areas where they're building off-site bikeways.
Okay, so make sure I understand here, summarizing. Council staff's recommendation is fairly consistent with existing practice with the bike tests, and then the second question is, where can the money be spent? And council staff's recommendation is, in the packet, and it feels to me like that's where I'm landing. Any other comments? Andrew's already expressed support for at least part of that.
I agree.
Could I suggest on the geography?
Sure.
You
Sorry,
could say.
Will, I didn't realize that was
sorry, I
you
didn't mean
talking.
to interrupt.
I was just saying, I agree with the council staff recommendation.
Okay, Casey.
I was just going to suggest on the geography, you could impose a geographic limitation that's a little bit looser, but not countywide. Like you could say it has to be spent in the same master plan area and adjacent master plan area, for example. Or we have transportation policy areas that divide up the county into little pieces. So you could.
I thought that's what it was. I thought it was like policy area.
Policy area, yeah.
You could say something like, some kind of adjacency of policy area or master plan area.
Well, again, the problem, and maybe planning staff can weigh in. We had this discussion in our meeting, and there was a feeling that from planning staff's point of view, some of these policy areas are actually quite large. And to actually have it built in the adjacent policy area could be miles and miles away, and you lose that nexus. I suppose, so I think that would be difficult.
All right.
And the only other
smooth this out here. Go ahead,
Okay.
Glenn. Last comment.
Well, I just want to react to a minor point. It sounded like a minor point. It really isn't. That Chris had mentioned that in the mitigation payment, that the applicant must pay to MCDOT the amount rather than equal to, say, up to the estimated cost. The worrisome here, it sort of depends on what the intent is here. I guess without putting something more definitive in there, I suppose they could be charged nothing or just a very nominal amount, which is not the point either. We could say up to, but there would need to be something. I don't know. Maybe the lawyers, maybe Bob wants to weigh in on this, Bob Drummer. I feel uncomfortable with that because, again, a mitigation payment is supposed to be an amount. There's usually no negotiations over the amount of the payment. It is what it is. And I'm afraid in some cases, the judgment might be made that, oh, you have to pay all of it. In other cases, you don't pay hardly any of it. Maybe if there was a percentage to, maybe up to 90% or up to 80% or something.
Glenn?
Yeah.
What if it was just no more than?
That's my problem.
That's what Chris said. I thought.
That's what Chris said.
How about if we add that reasonably?
Could be a lot less.
How about if you add, instead of saying not to exceed, you use like a term of reasonable or something that provides some level of flexibility that Mr. Conklin was referencing, that said that reasonably reflects the cost of, or reasonably, fulfills the.
That would be better.
Mitigates the public cost of, et cetera. Would that satisfy the issue?
I think that would be an improvement. Yeah.
Mr.
That's
Conklin?
not so much my issue as the planning
Oh,
You cut out there,
department's issue
Mr.
in
Conklin.
making sure that the requirements are proportionate.
say
So
that
it's
again,
not so much a
Chris.
DOT issue as a planning issue to make sure that these payments are proportional or have a, to the development.
And, and I would just say, I don't think we're ever going to have a project where we're going to say, oh, you don't meet the test, but we're going to absolve you of all of the payment. I think that having some flexibility is good, and I think we're hearing that from DOT. We agree. I think the language of, that's being batted about of no more than what is reasonably estimated to be MCDOT's estimated costs, or we'd have to work on the wording a little bit, but I do think the goal that we're trying to achieve is that there is a little bit of flexibility, which I think is a good thing.
All right.
Dr. Olin, if you added and proportionate, 0 is not proportionate, just like 10 times the cost is not proportionate either. So
The problem with
even if you
proportion
had
is
not to exceed, proportionate, is both sides of.
If I can suggest, I think the idea of using reasonable is the best option, at least that I've heard. The problem with proportionate is there are so many different ways of measuring proportionate, and the test itself, the chart, basically says this is what you should be doing, and that may or may not be proportionate. You may have and this is the case again before we have an first developer through the gate might be required to do a lot. Next one calling right behind him, building right next door, may not have to build anything because the first one's building it. That's the fact of life. Until when we have an that was the advantage of the is everybody's paying their proportionate share. But that's not the case until we have the
Since it was my suggestion, I think if we're going to do that, we should do reasonable to the cost and proportionate to the project. Reasonable to the cost of the infrastructure improvement and proportionate to the project, so we cover both bases.
Well, the proportion of the project has to do with the chart again. Like if it's a larger development, they're paying proportionally more. They're paying more. I would recommend just using the reasonable. What you said first. Your first letter to Kennedy, not your second one.
Is there a concern from planning there?
I think the word reasonable is a good word to use. I think that we can, between now and the next work session, we can talk to council staff and DOT staff and try to, wordsmith it a little bit.
This is Bob Drummer, just to say that legally, if you're going to delegate discretion, you're going to have criteria that can be followed. Saying it's reasonably related to the cost of the improvement is fine. But just know that if you do that, you're also going to end up with challenges and potentially hearings and litigation over what the cost, what is reasonable and what the, you have to give somebody a hearing if they say, no, your charge is unreasonable and it's not related to the cost. Two people are going to come up with different, they're going to have an expert say, no, it's going to cost this. No, it's going to, and so just realize it's fine to do that, but you're going to have that problem.
And we have these problems all the time. you just don't see it.
I was going to say, welcome to our world in development review. That is exactly
Mr. Drummer's job
every day.
That's right.
Warn us.
All right. So I think we have a consensus approach.
Okay. I'll just repeat it just like one.
Our department is not organized to implement developer mitigation, so we will have to figure out a way to respond to this to meet these smaller area allocations that may have other budget implications. We're organized to operate the system and execute our CIP, but this is quite different than that.
Let me just summarize. So the committee's recommendation, I believe it's unanimous. Tell me if I'm wrong. is that essentially the chart is good. And in the mitigation part of it, it would be the payment would be to MCDOT a reasonable. We'll figure out the language exactly, but essentially reasonable to the estimated cost of the project. And that in terms of the scope, the money has to be spent in the same policy area unless it's in a red policy area. It can be in the area around it, but also in the Clarksburg Town Center and Germantown Town Center and Burtonsville Town Center, it can be in the policy area around it. I believe that's the committee recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apologies for the gift cards. I just don't know that we have an option here. So keep going.
That's the hardest of them.
I would just say the gift cards is a challenge, but I've never turned down a gift card either. So
never spent one. Always enjoy getting them.
Happy to have them. Seldom use them.
On the transit adequacy test, again, we turned away from providing additional buses if the bus is overcrowded for the reasons we talked about 2 weeks ago, but more towards bus shelters and how they're outfitted and pedestrian connections to them. You see the chart, I believe it's on top of page 7. The version I have may not be, maybe the bottom page 6, it's somewhere in that area. And again, we have the same categories in terms of peak hour person trips and the same categories in terms of red and orange versus yellow. The difference here is that we would not apply it in the green policy area at all, because the bus transit is really not much of a presence there at all. And we had the same comment from DOT about the applicability. And if you go with the same rule that we talked about for the bike test, that would be what my recommendation would be. I would think we want to use the same tests. Mr. Downey raised 2 points on this. One was add language clarifying that the bus stop upgrade requirements only apply to existing bus stops. That's generally true, but I wouldn't always say that, because if you've got a large office building, a campus style office building in the yellow area where there's a greenfield area now, there may not be a bus stop nearby, and it would make sense to actually put a bus stop in front of that facility. And so you'd want to make sure that the developer is required, if it meets the requirement in the table, that he provide a shelter and the amenities on that bus stop. So I wouldn't agree with that. However, the second point he says is add language clarifying that an applicant's potential exposure for bus stop upgrades is capped at the applicable number of stops. And that's actually what this is. We can add language which makes it very clear that that's what it is. But again, to read that table, if you're in the orange area and you've got 350 or more peak hour person trips, you look at the you have to make sure there are 4 shelters within 1,500 feet that have a shelter, 4 bus stops, that have a shelter and the real-time travel information and pedestrian connections to it. If there are, in this particular case, if there are already 4 shelters within 1,500 feet, but they're missing the real-time travel information, they have to provide the real-time travel information. If there is pedestrian connections to 2 of them, but not the other 2, they have to provide the connections to the other 2. It is capped at that. So I could add some language which satisfies that. But otherwise, I'd make the same recommendation I made on the bike one, which is the money has to be spent. If you follow this chart, the money has to be spent in the same policy area, unless you're in a red policy area or unless in those 3 little orange ones that I mentioned earlier, Clarksburg Town Center, Germantown Town Center, Burtonsville Town Center. In that case, you could spend the money in an adjacent policy area.
All right. Ken, I think we have a consensus item here.
Okay.
I won't rehash the last argument because it's the same, but we did add some eligible uses.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I apologize. And council staff concurs with that. Basically saying that for the mitigation payment, the money could also be used for improved crossings and for improved lighting. And I concur. I think that's a good addition. Thank you. Is the committee okay with that?
I am. Yeah, we are.
Okay. Thanks. The next is the pedestrian system test. Here, essentially, this is, I don't know if we talked this in the staffs. We didn't come to a final conclusion on this. that's in terms of that consensus. But in my original packet, I said this should wait until the completion of the pedestrian level of service map, level of comfort map, which won't be finished until next summer. And so the thought was come back with an SSP amendment then, maybe acting on it in the fall. Planning staff since has pointed out that yes, the map's not done and won't be done until then, but most of it's done. And the methodology for determining that whether, which level of comfort you're at exists. And so it wouldn't be difficult to figure that out if a developer comes in. So why not act on this now? My suggestion is still not to act on it now, because really there's been very little attention spent to this by the council. DOT has been involved with some meetings, but they haven't really weighed in heavily on this. I think there are a lot of implications with the methodology itself. And I think this is really an important test. And I think it deserves a lot of focus. So my recommendation here is, for the time being, and the time being really is like for another 3 months, continue with the existing test. But for the council, on behalf of the planning board, to introduce an SSP amendment right after you approve this SSP, which would put on the table what they're proposing for their broader test. You would then have a public hearing strictly on this, probably in late January, and then have work sessions in committee and action by the council, I would think, by the end of February. And that would allow a lot of focus on this from developers trying to understand what the impact would be on them, DOT in terms of what it means to their program, and really most importantly for you to understand what this methodology is and why certain things are classified where they are, because there are some interesting issues there. So it's a postponement, but not nearly as much of a postponement as what I'd recommended earlier. I think we're talking about a separate process for that. And so that's my recommendation.
All right, so I want to start by saying I like the idea of having this be a focused process for us at the council. I'm really interested in this. I think it's great. And one thing I don't like about the SSP is just how we have to just move this massive project through and we barely get a chance to digest components. And I think that this is an innovative concept from planning, and I'd like to pull it out and give it the time that it deserves. I am concerned about what we do in the interim. So I'm a little unclear as to whether the current test is sufficient in that interim. But, I think we could hear from Casey or David Ansbacher or Jason about those issues. Do my colleagues have any questions or comments before we go to that discussion?
Yeah. Well, I can just
Go ahead,
briefly.
Mr. Cronin.
Yeah, thank you. I just think I agree with your comments, Mr. Chairman, that I appreciated this recommendation from Dr. Orland to pull it out and look at it in a more, comprehensive way. So, and it is an important issue. So I would agree with that. I am curious to hear after Mr. Friedson what the comments are from planning about and DOT and others about the adequacy of the interim. But I am heartened to hear that it doesn't have to be that much of an interim. We're talking about 6 months or so. So
Actually, it's 2 months, because the planning board's recommending approval of the effective date for the LATR test is January 1st. And I really think the schedule I laid out, you could adopt an SSP amendment by the end of February. So we're talking 2 months. We're talking 2 months.
Gwen is saying not.
We do not have the capacity to take on another amendment to the SSP in November. We have the same staff who are working on this, working on the pedestrian master plan, Thrive Montgomery, our street, complete street guidelines. If you decide you'd like to spend more time diving into this and having a deeper discussion, we can do that, but it's not 2 months. We have talked about having to come back with an SSP amendment on other topics in about a year, and we could integrate it with those other topics that we've already talked about having to come back with. But I have to tell you, we do not have the staff capacity to come back in 2 months.
Hey, Gwen, I'm a little unclear. I'm under the impression that this methodology is nearly complete. Are you talking about the methodology?
We are complete, but what you're asking us to do is then do a lot of outreach with the council and with DOT to discuss this methodology, to get their feedback, to get your feedback. We're having trouble scheduling our semi-annual with the council, much less adding another SSP amendment. It's our capacity and it's your capacity. We want you to understand what we're doing, but there is so much going on in the next few months between this and Thrive, and we have our complete streets design guidelines coming forward, that if you really, really want to dive into it and talk about it, it's going to take more than 2 months.
Now,
And-
Jason's nodding. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, if I could, I feel very strongly that there's no reason to come back 1 month from now with an amendment to a growth policy that we can tackle right now. The PLOC methodology is ready. It's done. And it has been vetted. At first, it was developed in conjunction with a nationally recognized transportation consulting firm using nationally proven best practices for pedestrian facilities and safety. Then, in September of 2019, we proactively sought DOT's feedback on the draft methodology, and they took advantage of that opportunity and provided us with more than 30 comments and suggestions that we then used to revise the methodology. Then, as we started the pedestrian master plan, we held 6 community kickoff meetings where the initial PLOC map kind of took center stage. And we also have a pedestrian master plan community advisory group that has had the opportunity to provide feedback on the PLOC methodology. And the feedback that we've gotten from the community, we also use to revise that methodology. And we've been using that methodology now for the past year to develop the map, but also underpinning the pedestrian master plan. This is what we do. You know, we develop these types of tools, and this is our expertise as a planning department. And we have plenty of examples of how we do this. We have similar tools today that haven't required extensive review by the council or by the county executive. And a perfect example is the level of traffic stress methodology. We've had that as part of LATR since the adoption of the 2016 SSP. 4 years ago, but the bicycle master plan wasn't adopted until 2 years later, but the council felt comfortable putting that level of traffic stress as part of LATR in 2016. And we could do the same right now. And what we're basically saying is we've had the opportunity. This has been public since May, this recommendation, and people have had the opportunity to provide comments on it and to suggest that because the focus has been on schools, that people haven't had the opportunity to comment on the transportation component. You could basically say that for any of the recommendations of transportation and say that we should delay all of them because there hasn't been a sufficient amount of focus on it. We think that there has been that focus, and we have a recommendation before you now. There's no reason to come back a month from now with the same exact recommendation when we can go forward with it today.
Okay. That's interesting, compelling. Andrew.
Yeah, I was concerned coming into this conversation about delaying this. I'm even more concerned now after hearing the comments and very compelling points made by planning staff. The idea that with all of the commitments that we have made on Vision Zero, that we would pass a growth policy dealing with adequate and appropriate public infrastructure that basically stamps an incomplete on pedestrian safety is so far against every other message that we have tried to send and every other policy that we have tried to implement in order to address pedestrian safety and shared streets in a way that is serious and substantive. And I would just be very concerned of both the practical realities and the perception that we would be creating to a public that we have worked very hard to explain how serious we are about keeping people safe on our streets, whether they're walking, they're biking, or they're in a car. And so I do not agree with the staff recommendation on this. I think if we're doing a policy that deals with how we grow and the type of communities that we're building and the infrastructure that we need, that it absolutely under no circumstances cannot include pedestrian safety, pedestrian tests, and the modern infrastructure that we all know that we need to keep our residents safe on the infrastructure and transportation that we're building.
Glenn.
If you look on the top of page 8, you see what the proposed test is. And it's quite a bit of an expansion. It's not just the pedestrian level of comfort methodology, that determines what has to be built, which we haven't really talked about at all. But it also includes the having to do street lighting. a lot of other areas as well. We did get comments, I don't have it in front of me, from several of the development communities saying that they're really worried about this kind of additional scope because it's a lot of additional work that would have to be done as a result. A lot of this is not impact tax creditable. The lighting is not, for example. And I know the DOT in their comments also was concerned about the extent of this. So it's not just merely a matter of the methodology itself, which I'm not sure council members understand right now because you haven't really talked about it. And yes, it does mean some more time from planning staff to brief you, and we'd have a committee session to do that. If they want to spend more time briefing privately, that's on them to do this. But they don't have to produce any more proposals. We're just putting forward the exact proposal had put forward in May, or as of July, August 1st. So
We seem to have a factual disagreement as to whether this thing is before us or not, or ready or not, or fully baked or not.
Can I make a comment, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Yeah, I just look. Director Conklin knows this. I think the planning board knows this. When we did the walking tour of Wheaton, this is something I really care about and think is really important that we update this and have these. I like the increased scope, on its face, but I just something was said that troubled me. I mean, the idea that the planning board did their thing and brought it to us, that's great, but we have the authority to approve it and must understand it fully and have kicked all the tires. And if we haven't had the time to do that, the process is not done. So I really don't want to set that precedent. And so while I understand we've got a lot going on and we have put a lot on your agenda, I know it was going back to Thrive, the Thrive project. I know that was sped up and you guys are working really hard, but I don't want to, if we're not sure and haven't understood it completely, I don't think we should just push it through. So for that reason alone, even though I'm very interested in what I read in the packet here, in my understanding of it to date, I think having a more in-depth discussion, if we on this committee are in this place, the full council has no clue. So I just think it's something that is important. I don't think that I know Mr. Friedson, I agree with you, this is really important. I don't think it would be us saying that this is a de-emphasis. I think we're saying this is so important, we want to take a little more time with it, So I understand that could be a reasonable disagreement, but I just wanted to say that. So I feel pretty strongly that we should, not for the reasons that maybe Glenn is saying, that it might be too onerous of a requirement. I actually like the direction, but I'm not saying you're saying that, Glenn, but maybe that's embedded in some of the concerns. So anyway, I just think we should take the time.
So
Jason, what is the analogy here in terms of tests? I mean, we have debated here in the past HCM versus,
CLV,
and so on. What is the analogy here?
I guess a perfect analogy would be the bicycle stress, the level of traffic stress methodology that we have in LATR right now that says, and we just talked about this with the bicycle test, you need to bring it up to a standard of LTS2. And there's a whole methodology that determines how our streets are designated on that LTS scale for bicycle bicycle safety, essentially, right? And so this is kind of the same thing. We have that methodology already completed on the pedestrian side. We call that the PLOC methodology, the pedestrian level of comfort. So it's ready, and it's ready to be integrated into the into LATR. Another example would be, our regional our regional travel demand model. We use that model today to make decisions on master plans and development applications, and we use it to craft policy. But the details of that model have never been, opened up and vetted, by the council. But yet we've described it at a higher level, and we'd be more than happy to describe the pedestrian level of comfort methodology to you today, or at a future work session on this SSP. Like, we'd rather do it now while we've got it already open and before us.
I have to respond on the travel model. The council has countless times in the past 30 years I've been working on this, reviewed aspects of the travel model because it had a direct impact on the results. So they haven't done it. They haven't done it in the last couple of years because it really hasn't been a change, but they have. You're right about the bicycle stress test. Frankly, that should have been done by the council 4 years ago. We ran out of time there too. So we just did it and we went forward with it and didn't spend a lot of time looking at the bike test, to be perfectly frank. So my main point, and I'm glad Mr. Juana made the point, I'm not necessarily agreeing with the developers, okay? What I'm saying is that if the council doesn't understand what they're buying, they should just blanket approve it. They should really understand it and then approve it with any changes they want to make, or maybe with no change. And in terms of developing the plan, you got no work to do because we're going to introduce it for you. But the amount of time it would take for you would be, for planning staff, would be staffing the committee meeting, maybe it's just one, and the council meeting, and showing at the public hearing, I guess. And to the extent you want to do, obviously you should have some conversations with DOT and with myself as well to make sure we understand our questions. There is more work there, but I don't think it's certainly not started from scratch. And it involves really more work on the part of the executive branch. There's been no really analysis of this by OMB or finance and so I really believe strongly. And to Mr. Friesen's point, there is a pedestrian test. We're not approving as SSP without a pedestrian test. It's the existing test. It's just a matter of keeping it for another 2 months before replacing it with something bigger.
From Chris Conklin and Meredith Wellington.
I don't know enough about the methodology or its status to comment on whether you should adopt it or not. And I don't know if that's telling or not, but I'm not familiar with it. Gary and Andrew might be. And what I was going to mention is what Glenn just mentioned, is there was a fair amount of work on the pedestrian tests last time, and you're not without any attention to that. And when we talk about the Vision Zero impact statement a little bit later, these issues will get vetted of that as well. So I personally would not be uncomfortable if you followed the council staff's recommendation here. But I have not been involved in the discussions between planning and our staff about the PLOC test itself.
Okay, Meredith?
Yes, the county executive at the time that we sent in our letter and our recommendations thought that this was not ready because there's other underlying things that were supposed to be completed. Now, maybe planning has completed them in the interim, but it was of course, the pedestrian master plan, the predictive safety analysis, which is incredibly important, the pedestrian level of comfort map, and the Vision Zero toolkit, as well as the complete street design guidelines. So the feeling was from DOT, because I did work with Andrew and Gary on this, and I don't know if Gary is there, but that it would be better, as the staff is recommending, to do this later when we had all the information that DOT could do a complete.
Why can't we, thank you, but why can't we just have a meeting like next week and get our briefing on this? I mean, honestly, it sounds like we can knock this out in a couple hours and save months of work.
Well, again, you're not getting feedback from the formal feedback from the public. You're not having the advantage of a public hearing.
To Jason's point, it has been public. It has been out there.
Well, but you haven't heard from the public as to how they feel about it.
I think that's a question. Was all the materials out in the public?
But with all due respect, I mean, if that is the point that we're taking here, then we shouldn't be taking up this policy at all. And I think Meredith is trying to make that point right now. I mean, there's such an inconsistency of what we're talking about here. I mean, I have to say, I'm a little bit troubled that there isn't more coordination and collaboration between the executive branch and planning. The idea that the executive branch isn't aware of what's been out there in the public sphere, and the basis for the recommendations is disappointing. But this is our job. Our job is to take up the growth policy and to take up the SSP. We have a recommendation. We're supposed to make a decision based on the recommendation. I am just confused as to why this is so dramatically different than every other aspect of this plan. I mean, we're making huge changes in this plan. There are some who suggest that we should make no changes in this plan and we should kick the can down the road for another year or 2 years. I don't subscribe to that belief, but I don't understand. I could better understand the idea of saying you should kick everything down the road, or you should take this policy up as it is presented before you, as the law requires us to do, and as is our obligation as a committee and as a council. I don't understand the picking and choosing what things make sense to take up and what things don't make sense to take up. That just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me.
Well,
Right.
it's
This has been
ready and what's not ready. So
well.
that's the point.
I think that's what we're going to find out. So this has been public. It has been part of the SSP. It has been noticed, had hearings. It has been evaluated. It sounds like we could use some more evaluation. And so I think next week we should have another Fed committee meeting, a couple hours, and let's get this thing done. Let's not just punt this and then go through 20 times more process than it needs to get to the same conclusion. All right.
Are you proposing, Mr. Chairman? I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying add a meeting that's not currently on the schedule?
Correct. We'll add a Fed committee meeting to the schedule for as soon as we can, consistent with making it clear, giving people, as much time as we get to digest this stuff.
And we appreciate that and we'll give you a full briefing on the pedestrian level of comfort methodology. It's a tool. And I think one of the things that's really important to understand is staff today is working on the pedestrian master plan. They are doing the staff work. They are using that tool today as part of their work on developing a pedestrian master plan. So it's related to the SSP, but we definitely, if you're going to want to hear about it, we want you to hear about it so that we aren't wasting our time using it as part of the pedestrian master plan development. So we would be glad to come back next week and do a briefing.
Right. I think next Friday, we can't schedule it right now, but I'm just going to throw out there, if next Friday works, let's try next Friday.
We'll have to talk to lots of other people. I want to look at the schedule and see what we can do.
Thursday morning.
Frank?
Thursday morning, but there may be another committee. I don't know if we're
let's not try to do that here. In fact, worst comes to worst, there are 2 council sessions on the 20th and the 27th. It may end up being that you have your committee meeting sometime that week, and we just not bring this forward as part of the meeting on the 20th. In terms of a committee recommendation, we could do on the 27th. So there is some flexibility there. I don't want to commit that we're going to be able to find a time next week. We already have committee meetings on Wednesday and on Monday. There may not be an opportunity to do it next week.
All right.
I so say thank you. That's a very good idea. And of course, it's better to get it done now if we possibly can, if they've got all the materials done, which I'll be interested to find out. But I also have to say I'm sorry, but I cannot stay for the rest of the session.
It's 12:30. Yeah, I understand.
Is here, and thank you all. Thank you so much.
There are 3 things left. 2 of them are really quick. Can we do the quick ones?
Yeah, let's do what we can. Let's see how fast we can.
The Vision Zero impact statement, the short answer is if you look at the addendum, DOT has a proposal on circle 2 of their packet as to what the language ought to be. All LATR studies for a site that will generate 50 or more peak hour person trips must develop a Vision Zero statement. The statement must assess and propose solutions to high injury network and safety issues, review traffic speeds, and describe in detail how safe site access will be provided. With concurrence with the responsible agency, projects must implement or contribute to the implementation of safety countermeasures. The county council may adopt predictive safety analysis, adopt predictive safety analysis as part of this statement when available. The last sentence refers to the fact that we are coming back with an SSP amendment. That's already been decided by you in the middle of next year, once that predictive safety analysis work is done. So it probably will be an SSP amendment coming over in the summer, and you'll review it in the fall. I'm fine with that. And I think DOT is proposing it. I think planning staff, board, are you okay with that?
Yes. Yeah.
Good, good. It looks
Okay.
like a well thought
Done.
through. I'm glad we're adding this. And I'm glad we're getting it right. Great.
Okay. And then the thing I want to cover today, because I think it's really quick also, is the last item. This is designating a Vision Zero representative to the DRC. We pointed out that really, this is not part of the SSP resolution proposed by the planning board anyway, but the way to implement it is to include language in the subdivision ordinance. And you asked us to come up with language that would do that, and it's there at the bottom of page 11, the underlined language, which basically it's the part of DOT's responsibilities on DRC, and it lists all the things that they're responsible for reviewing now: road, streets, intersection locations, site access, site distances, traffic calming paths, pedestrian, bicycle facilities, bike share, parking, transit facilities, transportation demand management elements, and storm drain within county maintained rights of way and easements, and then add the line with all reviews consistent with the objective to achieve Vision Zero goals. So that's our suggestion.
Thank you. Gwen or Jason, do you want to, or someone from planning field need to chime in, or does this look okay to you?
We're fine with the DRC language.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay, good.
Okay. So when we schedule the meeting whenever we schedule it, probably the week after next, it would be two items: the pedestrian test, as well as the mitigation priorities for the motor vehicle test, which is also kind of a sticky one.
Okay.
All right. With that, I think we're done.
Okay. All right. We made some progress. Thank you.
You did. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Yeah, you too.